listening to Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go. Hello.
Hey.
I'm so excited about this episode, and I know it's long. I know it's going to be at least 2 hours, okay? It's worth it. We love talking about attachment styles.
We had so much fun with this one. It was a unique one in that we've never brought on another person for a bonus book club.
Spoiler alert, because this isn't in the title, so they wouldn't know. There is a special guest on this episode, and it is our friend and my former client turned coach turned really self-taught expert on attachment theory, Amanda Johnson. We're gonna read her bio in a second, but Amanda and I have been talking about attachment theory, and we'll tell you why during this episode, for the last 7 or 8 months, almost nonstop. She's become obsessed with it and has learned everything about it and has started to integrate it into her coaching. And she's even, spoiler alert for this too, you'll hear her talk about this at the end of the episode, creating a group coaching experience around healing your attachment style. So if that is perking your ears up, please listen through to the end of this episode, because she's going to give you an opportunity to join her group at a very discounted rate because of the fact that you're a Clarity on Fire listener. And by the way, we don't make any money from that. I just want to say, we're not affiliates. We believe in Amanda and her process and her ability to help you heal. And so if that's something that you're interested in, please consider it. So this book club is about attached, which is, wait, hold on. Let me see if I can remember the subtitle off the top of my head, because I'm not looking at the book right now. The New Science of Adult Attachment and How It Can Help You Find and Keep Love.
Oh, good memory.
Good job, right? And you've obviously heard Kristen and I talk about attachment theory over and over again for the last, year or more.
In many contexts.
In so many different contexts. I'm going to link to some episodes in the show notes that are relevant to this conversation, either because we talked about attachment theory or maybe our one from last year with Amanda, which was a normal person interview, which was so worth listening to. If you haven't listened to that, go back to June of last year and listen to our interview with Amanda about her life, because that was just as fascinating as this. But as we've made clear in other episodes where we talk about attachment theory, I am sort of convinced at this point that there is almost nothing more important than that you understand your attachment style and how it plays into your nervous system and how it influences how you connect and try to bond and communicate with people in your life, not just in a romantic setting, but at work, with friends. It's underlying so much of our trauma and our patterns, and a lot of us really haven't learned enough about it. And so this is an episode where you're going to learn a ton about it, and
as well as how to start healing it.
Exactly.
That's the most important thing. Awareness is important, but then you have to know, what do I do to get to a more secure attached standpoint? So we will get into all of that and
then some.
I swear there's still so much more we could have gone into, and this was already so long. So
yeah,
and this is why Amanda's creating a course where you can deep dive into all of this. But this is really one of my favorite book clubs, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
That's saying something.
I love books. So yeah. Again, you don't have to have listened to this book or listened to it. Well, or read it. Listened or read it. You don't have to have engaged with this book in any way in order to benefit from this episode. This is first and foremost a conversation about attachment theory that is also anchored in some of the stuff that comes from the book, but it also expands beyond what you can find in the book. But anyway, would you like to read Amanda's bio?
Yep. Amanda Johnson is the owner of HeartSpark, a heart-centered life coaching and intuitive energy work practice based outside of Boston. Amanda's passion lies in the idea that each of our hearts is guiding the way to our most expansive lives. But that to live from the heart, we need to first get in touch with who we really are, not who we've been told to be. That requires a deep dive into how our emotions and energy are currently showing up and identifying what shifts can be made to uncover the magic that exists within each of us. It also requires an understanding of how our bodies and minds work so that we can bring ourselves into balance. Through HeartSpark, Amanda combines her experience, education, and interests, she loves an ADHD tangent, to offer a variety of session types, everything from energy-focused coaching to intuitive visioning to workshops on the nervous system. Amanda has an undergraduate degree in journalism, an MBA from Boston College, and is a Reiki master and IPEC certified life coach. She believes that all of the answers you are looking for are within you, and that having the support to listen to yourself and find your truth is the way to freedom, evolution, and fully enjoying your life experience. HeartSpark is dedicated to creating a safe space for anyone with a curiosity about themselves to deeply connect with their soul purpose and unique gifts and take steps to reach alignment. You can find her at heartsparksoul.com and on Instagram at heartsparksoul.
HeartSparkSoul. Okay. I really hope you will enjoy this. I think you will. I think you're going to get a lot out of it. It will also make you laugh and make you think. All the things you could hope for, I think, in an episode. So enjoy. And we will be back at the end. I mean, with more to say, as always. When am I done talking? Never. Okay. See you at the end. Hello.
Hey, Amanda.
Hello. So happy to be here.
To be back.
To be here again.
I know. It's a big deal. Thank you for having me back.
And now as an expert. So, yeah, she's
promoted.
I love that. Yeah, I feel like the last time I was with you, Rachel, but of course, Kristen, you were here in spirit. I was in the midst of finishing my coaching certification, and now I have that. So definitely things have changed.
Mm-hmm. And since then, you have become the really self-titled expert on today's subject, which is attachment theory. So what I love about you is that with your ADHD, you often have hyperfixations where like right now it's playing the piano. Like for the past, week or so, you're like, I am learning how to play the piano. And it's like all you can think about and you're obsessed with it.
Yep.
But
I'm playing at like 1 a.m.
when you should be sleeping. Oh my God.
Yep.
So we thought, you said for a long time, oh, attachment theory is my new ADHD hyperfixation. But it has lasted for like a solid 7-8 months. So I don't think it's a hyperfixation. I think you just genuinely love it and care about it and want to talk about it all the time. And it has become like a real passion of yours, which is why when I knew that we were going to have the opportunity to do a bonus book club episode this month, I was like, let's do it on Attached, but let's bring on the person who has become the foremost expert in my circle on the book Attached and let her talk about it because she's so excited about it.
I'm so excited. I really am. Thank you for that intro. And yes, I appreciate the sort of reflection back that it's not an ADHD hyperfixation. I mean, it certainly could have started that way, but it's become so ingrained in my life and just how I guess, approach all sorts of things, all sorts of relationships. I mean, Rachel, we've talked a lot about attachment, and it's also just snowballed into other things. I've become obsessed with the nervous system, which is so attached to the attachment theory. And yeah, it's just really become an integral part of my own personal life and my work.
Well, I'm excited to do this version of a book club because this time it's not us just talking ad nauseum about our own excitement. Now we get to bring somebody into the mix and kind of have an actual book club. I don't know if a book club counts if it's only 2 people, but a 3-person book club definitely counts. So this is our first time. This is our first time doing it in more of a true club style.
It's legit. I mean, it was legit with the two of you. We love those episodes.
Okay, so where to begin on the book Attached? I guess we have to start at the very beginning, which is Amanda, in your own words. Would you please remind everybody and or educate them for the first time, if this is the first time they're hearing about it, what is attachment theory?
Yes. So attachment theory is this way of looking at relationships. And when it comes to the book Attached, they talk a lot about romantic relationships, but honestly, it's way more than that, in my own opinion. And maybe you guys would agree too, that really this shows up everywhere. So it's basically the way that we interact with the closest people in our lives. It really starts in our early childhood, and there are some core styles. So it's okay with you guys. I'll just run through those really fast and get that part out of the way, and then we'll keep moving. So there's anxious attachment, which is this desire to be extremely close. And our nervous systems can feel really dysregulated when the people that we feel that closeness with feel like they're maybe pulling away from us a little bit. There's avoidant attachment, which is pretty much the opposite of that. And closeness can make avoidant attached people feel as though they're sort of being engulfed. And that feels really unsafe for them and can make them start to pull away. Then there is disorganized, which is pretty much a combination of anxious and avoidant. And that can be really challenging because you're sort of on a roller coaster of, I want to be close. No, it's too close. I have to get away. And I say it like that because I have that attachment style. At least I used to. I'm working a lot more on being secure, but it's a very familiar place for me to have that desire to be close. And then, oh no, it's too close. So I need to have some space. And then I already mentioned it, but the fourth one is secure attachment. And people who have secure attachment don't really get scared by sharing their feelings, really deep intimacy, and can navigate conflict a lot easier than some of the more insecure styles.
Okay. I assume we're going to do a deep dive or deeper dive into each of those, but yes, that's a great overview. So, okay. I remember that when we did our episode on Good Inside, Dr. Becky talks a lot about attachment theory, which I appreciated because I don't know that you can talk about like raising kids without acknowledging your own attachment style. And, you know, like being cognizant of trying to create a secure attachment with kids. But the way that she talked about it was something like, and I felt like this made so much sense to me in a way that maybe learning about it in like psychology class, like didn't resonate with me as much. But she talked about it as when you're a kid, you quickly learn what is and isn't sort of going to be acceptable when it comes to getting consistent love and feedback and support and security from your parents. And so you quickly learn sort of how to get those needs met. And if you have a parent who's like inconsistent in some way, typically you then have an insecure, AKA one of those core three, anxious, avoidant, or disorganized attachment style, based on the fact that either physically or emotionally, you are not getting needs met either at all or really inconsistently. And so you then learn how to kind of try to fill in the gaps of how to keep getting those needs met or to get them met as often as possible, which is then what creates things like people pleasing, which is then what creates things like your nervous system getting really out of whack when someone gets angry because you're feeling that loss of connection, which when you're a child is imperative that you try to maintain because you know on a biological level, I am relying on these people to survive. If I cannot maintain a connection, then it's literally threatening my survival. And so we take it upon ourselves, even though it's our parents' responsibility to be super consistent about meeting our needs emotionally and physically. Let's be honest, most humans did not have parents who were successful in consistently meeting our emotional and physical needs. And so then we end up taking on that responsibility and trying to fill in the gaps. Or we should end up just shutting down and not trying to fill in the gaps, which I think is more avoidance, right? So anyway, right. I also find it endlessly fascinating because I feel like it does show up in every single facet of like every major relationship in your life, not just romantic. We've talked about it at work. We have a whole episode about how we think it manifests at work. And so I just can't unsee it now. You know what I mean? And I don't think any of us can unsee what we now see with attachment theory.
Yeah. If I could just reply to that, Rachel, because I love everything you said. And Dr. Becky's amazing. And the way she approaches it is really helpful, especially because so much of her work allows parents to do the reparenting work, right? So that they can get closer to secure attachment. And then even if they have older children, you can always build secure attachment. And I think, actually, let me just say that really quickly. Your attachment style and even how your nervous system operates isn't a life sentence. Like, we can do work to feel better. And I know your listeners know that because you guys talk about that in all different ways, but I feel like it's really important with attachment style, because anytime we put a label on something, it can feel really restrictive and, oh my gosh, this is me forever. That can be helpful in some ways, but then it can also feel like, well, now I'm stuck here forever. And that's not true. Because Rachel, everything you were saying about children and how we have to become attuned to our parents, and they should be attuned to us too, but sometimes that doesn't happen. I think that's what I was hearing you say. Mm-hmm. And that's, becomes how we now navigate the world. It's hardwired into our nervous systems and into our brains. And there's another really important thing I just wanted to briefly mention, which is a lot of attachment theory and also our nervous system has to do with our DNA and our genes. And we can start to even think about sort of generational trauma. It's like, if I had a great grandparent whose parents weren't attuned to them, there's some maybe predisposition in my own genes to have a possibility that I become hypervigilant. I'm more anxious, right? So I think it's really important to consider there's so many facets at play here. And also another one that the book mentions, if you end up reading the book, you'll read this part, is you could be secure. So you had parents that were attuned to you, your genes were set up to get you, ready to attach with people in a secure way. And then maybe you have a really challenging romantic relationship. And all of a sudden, you're completely thrown off. And so I think there was a stat in the book. I wrote this down, so I'm pretty sure this is accurate, that 70 to 75% of people's attachment styles just stay consistent. Obviously, this is without doing work, right? Like, we can always change. But there's 25 to 30% that change. And that's based on these fluctuations in our relationships and our environments. Okay. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think that's a real sign of who is doing the work and who's not doing the work, because you're right, it's not a static thing, but that means 3/4 of people at least are not, they just feel stuck with this, or they think it's normal because maybe they don't even know what attachment styles are. And so the way they're reacting feels like, well, how else could I possibly react? That's what I grew up seeing, or that's what how I've always felt in this situation. And so even just the awareness of the 4 styles and starting to see yourself in it, I think is a huge leap toward becoming the 25% that does start to change your attachment style. But there's more work to be done beyond just the awareness. That's kind of step 1.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And this is how I think the 3 of us look at these things. I think I heard you say this, Rachel, which is, and you just said this too, Kristen, it's like the awareness is the gateway to everything. You cannot unsee this once you see it in yourself and the people around you. And I would say the same goes for understanding our nervous systems. It's like, once you get fight or flight, freeze, fawn states, and you can start recognizing that in yourself and then attach the dots to attachment theory, you could really start navigating your life differently. And you're not a victim anymore to the scenarios that you're in. I won't say it's easy, though. I'm sure all 3 of us could comment on this in different ways.
Okay, so here's where I think it would make sense we've already started, but to start when it comes to breaking down each of the major attachment styles. Could we start with defining what secure attachment is? Because that's what we're trying to get to. That's our home base. So then it's helpful to have something to compare to once we then start talking about anxious and avoidant. What is secure attachment? And honestly, some of us might never have experienced it. And that's really sad, but it could be true.
It's really true. I took this course outside of the book because of my obsession that was about attachment theory and trauma. And it was really eye-opening just to see how many people actually have not had a secure person. And sometimes their therapist or their coach is the first ever person that shows up for them consistently with a regulated nervous system. And we all deserve that as human beings, I think, to feel safe and secure. So, Rachel, to answer your question, I actually wrote something down from the book that I really loved. And it said that when you are securely attached, you are programmed to expect to be loved and valued. And I think that's so important because this is all programming, right? Like we are unique individuals, and so much of how we show up is programmed into us and predictable. And actually, that gives us some freedom to realize that, oh my God, there's nothing wrong with me, right? This is just my upbringing. But there were three sort of things that secure people just do inherently. But if you want to be more secure, you would want to consider. So being available, especially emotionally available. So really trusting that you're safe to share your emotions. That's incredibly challenging for someone who grew up, like many people do, in a household where it wasn't safe to be yourself. And like you said earlier, Rachel, like maybe you turn into a people pleaser. Maybe you learn to suppress your emotions. Like insecurely attached people, that fear isn't there. It's wild to think about the way their brains work because the things, they don't worry about the things that anxiously attached people, for example, worry about, right? Where we might over obsess about really, like they seem like small things to a secure person, but to us, it's like, oh my God, this means the relationship's over. So again, emotional availability and just feeling safe and secure in sharing emotions is huge. And trusting, I think, is a really big part of being securely attached. These people just really feel calm in all sorts of relationship dynamics. They trust that the other person is doing their best. Like they give the benefit of the doubt sort of just naturally. It's a lot harder for them to take things personally. That doesn't mean that they don't get triggered, right? They're still humans. They still have the ability to slip into these other styles. And by the way, I want to say, I love having people there's an assessment in the book. So I love having people take an assessment to determine their style. And I think it's really important to also look at your secondary style because even if you're a secure person, if you get triggered, you might have a secondary style that becomes your triggered state. And so that can be really helpful. Okay, I talked a lot, Rachel. Did I answer your question about what it means to be secure?
Yeah, I just wanted people to have a visual of what secure attachment looks like. And I mean, I have some experience with it. I have a lot of experience with anxious attachment too, and also being on the receiving end of avoidance. So I feel like all of us have experience one way, shape, or form with all of it. But I think some of the things you said that really stand out to me are that securely attached people, or when you're just like in the presence of a securely attached person, you will notice that like they have a really hard time taking things personally. Like they just give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's not from like a people pleasing place. It's really just from like oh, okay. Yeah. Like they probably just meant what they said. Like they're not over analyzing it. They're not like scanning every single word that you say for like, well, what did that mean? And what did that mean? And what did that mean? Like, I think there's a ton of emotional maturity in securely attached people for the most part. Like, I think one of the most critical things of being in like a healthy, securely attached relationship is that you can present difficult information or feelings without the other person shutting down or exploding, like, or getting really upset, right? That they can reflect and they can hear that. And again, they're not internalizing it that much. They're able to understand and offer you acknowledgement or validation of your feelings and have a conversation with you about it. Like, they're able to stay calm. And like you said, keep their nervous system regulated, which that is a follow-up question that I think is really important for you to define, is because I think some people know what you're talking about. But I want to make sure that everybody knows. When you say like a regulated nervous system, what do you mean?
Yeah, it is so important. And, because I think about this all the time, sometimes I forget that most of us were not taught about our nervous systems. I think it's a huge miss. and probably one of the most important pieces of information that we can have about ourselves, because our nervous systems are pretty much the mechanism in our bodies to keep us alive. And so, similar to how we might talk about the brain, and they are connected and they're sort of like part of the same system, the brain and the nervous system doesn't really care about our happiness. It just wants us to live. And so the nervous system is taking in all this information. And this goes back to our conversation about why this is so important, especially in childhood, because before we're able to verbalize, we're literally depending only on our nervous system to feel safe. And so it's taking in all this information. This is happening before we actually can make conscious thought. So before we can even create a story, negative or positive, our nervous system is taking in all of this information through our senses, through our environment, and determining whether or not we're in a state of safety. And so what that means is there's a really specific study that I'm like obsessed with right now called polyvagal theory. And it studies these different parts of the nervous system. And there is a regulated state where we feel open, we feel safe. This is probably, if we want to connect it to attachment theory, where these secure people are spending the majority of their time. It's safe for them to feel connected, and their nervous system essentially isn't flooding their system with hormones to create either an increase or a decrease in energy in the body. So bear with me for a second, because there's two more things I want to touch on that I think is really important to know here, and then we can see sort of where we need to connect more dots. So if we start to perceive threat and danger in our nervous system, again, before we even have time to think about it, automatically our body is going to start being flooded with different hormones. And we're going to go into one of two places, or we might move through those in some sort of pattern that makes sense to our history. So we might go into the fight or flight or fawn state. And that's where we have an excess of energy. We're in hyperarousal. And our nervous system is getting ready for us to basically like fight our way or run away from danger. I think it's also, good to mention the people-pleasing stuff here, because a lot of times you might from the outside appear to be regulated, but inside you're dysregulated and you're pretending essentially that you're in that regulated state, but you're actually not feeling good inside your body. And then there's the shutdown state, which is the freeze state. And that's when we're hypoaroused. So there's less energy available to us. And that's because our body really thinks that we're going to die. And so it's just taking all of the energy and putting it towards the most important parts of our system so that we can survive. And this really important concept that I want to bring up when we're talking about the nervous system is the window of tolerance, which is super important for attachment theory too. Depending on who we are, how our nervous systems work, how our parents treated us, what our attachment system is, we have a window of tolerance. And that essentially tells us how long we can stay regulated before we find ourselves in one of those dysregulated states. And really our goal is to just widen that window so that we can stay more regulated and we can stay more secure. And that's really, really hard work, but it's totally possible to do. So basically just need to know that your nervous system is taking care of you, but sometimes it gets confused because we're not living, in prehistoric times or whatever or some ancient time and being chased by wild animals, right? We're sending emails and feeling dysregulated.
What I think, as you're talking through this, what I think would be helpful, especially as we're touching on each of the attachment styles, is to have maybe a scenario that we can keep coming back to and then see the difference in how they would. So I would be really curious. Let's just take something really simple, like a disagreement. So you're disagreeing with your romantic partner, or you're disagreeing with your boss or somebody really important to you, and that relationship matters. I'm not even saying you're fighting, but you're having a disagreement. How would a securely attached person respond? But then also, what would be happening in their nervous system in that scenario? And then we can see how that changes for each of the others.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. Okay, so I'll start with secure. Kristen, is that where you want me to go
Let's
first?
start with secure.
I love that for us because it's like we want to be secure. Okay, so if you were having a disagreement with your significant other and you were a secure person, again, holding space for the human experience, knowing that you still might be triggered, but you can still use your different strategies to stay calm and connected in that experience. And so you wouldn't take things as personal. Even if you did, you would quickly be able to access some other ways of thinking about that thing. You would be more flexible. So you would be very open to your partner's perspective and what they're saying. And there would be self-reflection sort of built into the experience in real time. There would also be a lot more compromise, working together as a team to sort of solve the problem together. And even if your partner was dysregulated, you would still be able to maintain to some extent your own regulation, which in turn is actually fantastic for your dysregulated partner who might have a different attachment style than you, right? Because you're able to actually bring them closer to you and bring them closer to security. You also there'd be no game playing. So you would be direct, you'd be honest, you would trust that your experience was valid, and you would be able to validate your partner's experience too without, they talk a lot in the book about protest behaviors and like just different behaviors that we move into depending on our attachment style. And so for the secure person, they just don't really need to go into those strategies as much. They feel pretty secure in what's happening and that the relationship will sustain. That's important. They go into these things with a belief that things continue on.
Yeah, the relationship is not in jeopardy and that it is not actually a life or death situation. I feel like the securely attached person is able to treat like an incident rather than like a commentary on the state of the union. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
correct.
And okay, so what would be happening within their body? Like, I assume they would be feeling, I mean, they might be sort of triggered. It's not like as a securely attached person, you can never be slightly aroused, obviously, but I feel like they would be relatively calm. Mm-hmm. They'd be able to like take a deep breath. They wouldn't be feeling super emotional, like super angry or super defensive or even shut down, right? Like what else is happening in their body?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think those are all sound accurate to me. And what else is coming up for me is that, yeah, even if if you remember the window of tolerance, before you slip into complete dysregulation, there's some warning clues that, again, you would have to sort of work on really knowing your own nervous system. That's fully possible to do that, by the way, to notice, oh, I'm sort of like on the borderline of slipping into dysregulation. And so a secure person might just be able to notice that and navigate themselves back. Also, again, like we've said several times, because we're all human, they might be flooded with some of the stress hormones, but maybe not as much. And so that's another reason why they can stay more regulated. They might be able to be more in touch and feel safe with the sensations and emotions coming up for them. And I think that's really important because a lot of times, especially in avoidant attachment, when the emotions come up, it feels really uncomfortable and we don't necessarily have the tools to navigate that experience. And so the secure person's not like that. So their body just can stay more in that regulated state and they can manage the different changes that are coming up at the body level. Like if their heart starts racing a little bit, they might be able to become aware of that. And like you guys said, I think you said, Rachel, take a deep breath to sort of navigate that versus it just completely overtaking their experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am so familiar with like feeling that momentum start to pick up and then it just spiraling out of control, like faster than you can control it. You are just off the deep end and now we've got to wait for the crash and burn and then like rebuild, it's too late. I'm also familiar with feeling it and then reeling it back in. Mm-hmm. I'm feeling like, I need a minute. I need to calm down. I see myself getting dysregulated right now. I need to like go for a walk. Like I need to like do things to help regulate my nervous system.
Yes.
There does seem to be a point of no return. And I think the warning signals can help you hopefully catch it before you get there. And if if you get there, you get there. Well,
Well-
that's what the other attachment styles are going to get into is once you've gone past, what did you call it, Amanda? The window of
The window of
tolerance.
tolerance.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely ways to get back. And we should talk about co-regulation, because that's really, really important when we want to consider how do we get more secure.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to move on to our first of the insecurely attached styles? You want to talk about anxious attachment?
Sure. When do you want me to do the example for that? Would you like me to share that right here at the beginning of what that might look like? Okay.
Yeah. Why don't we start with that? And then we can break down like why they're feeling like that. And
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So with anxious attachment, actually, one thing I want to say before I share the example is that anxiously attached people actually have a superpower. And maybe some of your audience might already know this from some of the episodes you've had on being highly sensitive and things like that, because they are so attuned to other people that they pick up on the tiniest little clues and cues, and they understand those. And so that is actually a really important survival strategy, but it can also cause harm when we're misinterpreting the meaning of those symbols and those cues that are coming through. So in that example of an anxiously attached person having an argument with their partner, they might just, like we just talked about, feel completely flooded and overwhelmed and spiraling out of control, because usually they're triggered into a threat to the relationship. And so they're picking up on those little cues, again, whether or not the person that they're in a relationship with is actually trying to leave them, it doesn't really matter. It feels as though that's true. And so, the tiniest little thing of, again, it's not tiny to them. I don't want to say that it's tiny, because I've had experiences like this too that feel huge. Someone doesn't call you back at the time that they said they were going to. Like, your nervous system feels in danger, and then your attachment system is activated, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, something terrible happened. It could be that they died, or it could be that they don't like me anymore. There's so many different ways our thoughts can go. And, again, these are like our thought patterns that are very much attached to our earliest days and how we navigated the world. They might also be really preoccupied with the argument, especially once it ends. So they can't stop thinking about it. Even if the other person has indicated that they're good, if they're still picking up on cues that that's not true to them, they'll still be ruminating on that argument or those things that came through. There might be a little bit more game playing here too. So some of those protest behaviors might come into play, where it's like, well, you took this long to reply to this, so now I'm going to take that same amount of time. Things where it's like, you're feeling really awful and dysregulated. And so the thought is, I want this other person to understand that. And here's how I do that. But
to feel how I feel, right? Like,
exactly.
It's kind of like, I want them to feel how I feel. And so if I do this, they'll feel that, which is not necessarily the truth. Oh my God.
Just confuses the other person.
Yes. Oh my God. I feel so embarrassed by this.
Yeah, you want to be understood, but you end up just being confusing, because they're not always picking up on the subtle cues like you're picking up on. Because like you said, if you're anxiously attached, you have that superpower, but you're probably not using it for good. You're using it and then interpreting it in the worst possible case scenario.
Right.
And you're expecting them to pick up on your subtle little cues.
And they might not be. They might not be.
You guys, I think we have to use me as an example. Because you both have had the privilege of having a front row seat to my show for the last 7-8 months, however long it's been, right? With Joseph, Amanda, remember, that's his name on the podcast.
I was going to ask you that. I was worried.
Yeah, that's his podcast name. Anyway, so I mean, how many times did you guys have to help me in my anxious spirals, especially in the early phases where we were just talking? I was so dysregulated all of the time, because And it's so hard when you're at the very beginning of a relationship, when you don't have a commitment from someone and you're just talking with them, but you like them and you're just unsure what everything means. And so everything you're interpreting and you're scanning. And I feel like hypervigilance is one of the hallmarks of being an anxiously attached person. And I was hyper vigilant every single day about like, well, what does this text mean? And what does that text mean? And when it came in at this time, what does the timing of it mean? What does the timing of it mean compared to the time I got the last text message? What about the fact that Amanda and her husband literally were on a group chat with me where her husband would talk me through stuff. And he was really like one of my secure attachment figures through this experience. And I really like credit him for that because he was really helpful to me in understanding like the male mind. And like, I was like spinning out of control because I hadn't heard from him in like almost 24 hours or something like that. And I was like, well, I guess he hates me now. And I guess we're never going to talk again, thinking I'm being abandoned, which is what you think when you're anxiously attached. And Todd was like, I think he just fell asleep.
And he was always right. Todd was always right.
Always right. He eventually I would get a text like a couple hours later, like, oh, I'm so sorry. I like was sick. You know, I've been sick and I fell asleep like last night at like 6 o'clock and I literally didn't wake up until 4 a.m. or something like that. But like just the constant over-assessing, over-analyzing what everything means, being super hyper-vigilant, and also the protest behaviors. Like, because then I would be like, well, I didn't hear from you for 24 hours. So I'm not going to respond to you all morning. And you're going to have to wonder what I'm doing. Meanwhile, I guarantee you, I've actually talked to him about this, like now, like in present day. And he's like, I was not wondering what you were doing. I was not paying attention. Like I did not notice that you were ignoring me, you know, like, I just came back when I had time to come back. And I came back pretty frequently because I was thinking about you very frequently because I really liked you.
And
one
Joseph,
of the things I think
he's secure.
He is.
He is secure.
As a fellow anxious attached person who has been working my way towards secure forever and will always be working my way toward that, what I think can make it even harder is when you have had experiences where your worst case scenarios did play out, where people just did ghost you, or they just never talked to you again, or they broke up with you, or
they were really inconsistent with their effect, like they were avoidant maybe, or they had a disorganized attachment style. And so, they did give you a lot of inconsistency and confusion and mixed messages. And so that fed your anxiety. And so now you're expecting it in the next person.
Proof that that's what's happening this time again. You don't get the chance. The anxiety doesn't give you the chance to treat each person as an individual separate person. All the old anxieties get triggered with the new relationship, or even if it's not a new relationship, if it's a long time relationship, but it's happened once before, it all gets brought back up. So that seems to be, that just seems to be a real challenge when you're working towards secure, but you have old stuff that gets re-triggered. It's like you have to heal the old stuff while you're also trying to respond in a healthier way in this moment.
I just want to say that it has taken me with all of my knowledge. I'm a coach. I've been a coach for 12 years. My circle is exclusively coaches, friends, like people who can like work me through emotional baggage. I have the foremost expert on attachment theory.
I am here
as a bestie of mine who can help me through this. And yet it has taken me months to get out of that, like the majority of that anxious, like attachment, like the worst of it. And the only thing that really did it was the consistency over time of him not showing up like some of those other people showed up. So Amanda, to your point about co-regulation, when someone who is a secure person just keeps showing up for an anxiously attached person in a very calm, soothing, like consistent way, it really can help you overcome some of the worst of your anxious attachment. But I'm going to tell you, it's not totally gone because he has ADHD too, and he cannot be accurate about when he's going to do stuff and when he's going to leave the house. And so every other Friday when he comes down to Virginia, he tells me, I think I'm going to leave the house by 4 or something, whatever. And inevitably it's like 5:30 when he actually leaves. And I feel the spiral and I feel it watch my body or leave my body. You know what I mean? And I can't rein it in. I get so angry and I feel so disrespected and I feel like hyper aroused and I literally can't rein it in. Like I'm still working on that. Like I cannot have like a securely attached response to that yet. And I'm just going to have to give myself grace about it because I've healed a lot of other stuff, but I have not yet healed my rage about disrespecting my time.
And that makes sense because even when we know these things, we're still going to be triggered. And, that it feels a certain way to you, Rachel. And
it feels like
okay.
he doesn't love me enough to be on time.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. And I know that's not correct. Like, I know that is not correct. And yet the feeling in my body is that if he cared enough about me, he would do this. And I think that's a really anxiously attached person's mantra is like, if they loved, like I need them to prove all the time that they love me. I need constant reassurance that they care about me. And I'm going to look for it everywhere. And I'm also going to sometimes ask for it, which is not always a bad thing, but then it can become really on the outside. It can look really clingy and needy. I'm thinking about Love is Blind. I know Kristen probably hasn't started her binge.
Oh no.
But I'm thinking
Are we going to we'll talk about this for like an hour if we start this.
Well, I just want to use like Chelsea from Love is Blind season 6 as the perfect example of like someone who is very clearly feeling disconnected from her new partner who is completely avoidant and really not that into her. And so she's actually right to be feeling the way she's feeling. But the constant, like, wait, do you love me? Wait, why did you look at her? Like and of course it's driving them further and further away, but you can't help it because you're so afraid you're going to lose this person that you need constant reassurance.
Well, you're looking for constant reassurance, but you're also looking for all the signs that they are going to leave.
Yeah.
Because that's when the danger signal starts to go in. And that's when you start to get really flooded so again, he's leaving an hour and a half late. Then is that a sign? Should I read into that? Right. So we're reading into everything from that anxious place because it all feels so dangerous and scary.
And then we'll attack them for doing something that they're not doing. Right. We'll be like, well, you clearly don't love me because you don't leave on time. And now you've created a much bigger problem because now they're like, wow, how is it? Like, how do you not know that I care about you? And now they're starting to wonder, what the heck is wrong with you? And, like now you're actually creating the disconnect that you're so afraid, like, to discover is there. And maybe wasn't there.
I think all the insecure styles probably do that to a degree is they create the thing they're afraid of.
They do. And that's why we're also attracted to the attachment style that will help us meet that self-fulfilled prophecy, right? Like anxious avoidant people are attracted to each other. And, from some sort of growth perspective, if you can navigate that situation, because it's very challenging, that's a great opportunity for us because that's how we heal. But it's hard. And everything you said, Rachel, oh my gosh, so many thoughts. I really quickly want to say on the Love is Blind thing, and I don't think this will ruin the ending, but at the reunion, the other women there said something to Chelsea, like it was so hard to see you in that state because that's not the version of you that we knew. So I think they were either talking to Chelsea or talking about her. Just saying,
they were. Yeah, they were saying like they didn't know that version of her until they saw it on TV because they, as friends, had not seen her in that insecure state. It got brought out in relation to her romantic situation.
Right. And I think that's so important. And if you read the book, there's actually a fantastic example. Actually, the book is so good because there's so many examples of, real life people that they've studied. But there's an example of this that plays out there too, which is how did this really seemingly secure person go into this, move into this completely other way of being, essentially, and feel like a completely different person to her friends or whatever. And that's how intense this stuff is. When you get triggered by the right person in the right way and your attachment system gets activated, you can act in ways that are they feel crazy, but they make sense because you feel that unsafe. And Rachel, you said so much about your experience. And I love that, especially because I was a part of that. And it was really healing for me too, to be a part of that, because as someone who has this like combination style, a lot of the stuff that you were moving through felt really like I understood it. Let's just say that, I might not have been experiencing that in that moment, but it felt like something that maybe I had experienced in the past, or that just made sense to me. And so, yeah, I was, as you were talking, I'm like, I'm sad that Todd doesn't have a nickname, but whatever. He was really helpful in that group chat for both of us, because you were navigating through these things, and to just witness that, I think was really helpful to see like how strong this really is, and how much our systems just want to feel safe and stable.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say something about anxious attachment that I think we talked about, Rachel, and maybe other people, maybe Kristen, if you guys haven't talked about this, it can offer this other thing that I feel like is really important when we're trying to heal this, which is, and so sorry, Rachel, to talk about time. I'm going to talk about time in a different way than
It's okay.
Joseph showing up late. So because we have this superpower of hypervigilance, and I'm saying that like that on purpose, because a lot of times hypervigilance, it's not helpful, but it can be helpful here when we give enough time to our situations to actually and appropriately figure out what's really happening. So what happens with anxious attachment is we usually jump to conclusions. We're so good at taking in all the information that we have that superpower, like we've talked about, but then we make meaning of it too quickly. And so one of the things that's introduced in the book as just a strategy that literally everybody who feels like they resonate with this attachment style can start doing today is just wait a little bit longer.
For more information.
And that is helpful, I think, in a couple of ways. One, you're getting more information. So probably your worst case scenario thinking is going to be, you're going to just find out whether or not it's right or wrong, right? Like if you're interacting with a secure person, it's probably wrong. The other thing is you're giving your nervous system time to get back into regulation. And so then you actually have a clearer perspective to access just more information that might have already been there that you couldn't see.
Mm-hmm. You told me this over and over again for months. Let's wait for more information, because I would jump to how many times, Amanda, was I like, I'm done with him?
Yes, I know.
Like so many times I was like, I'm done with him, because I was making meaning. I was jumping to a lot of conclusions about like what his texting behavior meant and all of that. And you were like, let's wait for more information. And inevitably, when I waited long enough for a little bit more information, he would be like, oh yeah, I fell asleep. And I was like, oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But if I had acted on the story I was telling myself in the moment, I could have really like blown everything up.
Yeah, it's really true. And I think that I'm glad we got to do that work together, because again, it was helpful for me to remember that for myself as well. But generally, I mean, okay, so we can talk about all humans here. It doesn't really matter what your attachment style is. We know that, again, because we want to survive, that our brains like to go into sort of the more negative thought patterns, and it's our work to shift those. And so it makes sense that you would be doing that. And then you add on just the sensitivity of your attachment style, which was programmed into you, right, from the day that you were born. And so it's just, it can be really helpful. I hope for you, Rachel, in those moments, and I know Todd was involved too, that we were those more secure people. Mm-hmm. I know sometimes I had to say, Todd, step in, because I don't know what to do here, because I would be also thinking the same thought. But those are the moments when it really is helpful to have a secure person just remind you. Like if you have a secure person in your life who can remind you to wait just a little bit longer, it makes a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't mean you're always going to be wrong. Because sometimes, again, as a highly sensitive person, you probably at some points are right about what you're picking up about somebody, right? Like you're picking up them pulling away or a disinterest in the relationship. And for sure, I have picked up on that in the past and been totally right about it. But I still think that waiting for more information is helpful because either way, you're going to get clarity eventually. But if you're right, you're going to get that clarity sooner or later. If you're wrong, though, then you can avoid creating a lot of chaos for yourself if you are in fact mistaken about someone and their intentions and like their behavior. If we can like wait until we feel a little bit calmer and like we've gotten ourselves back into somewhat of a state of regulation before we like address something, oh my God, that it's like a game
changer. Life-changing.
Yeah,
it's life-changing.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, I don't know if this is kind of in that same category, but it might actually be its own separate but related strategy. This is something that I would never initiate because my anxious attachment style would not let me initiate. But when, for example, if my husband and I are in an argument about something, or we're just like disagreeing and just kind of like bickering, he is so good about being like, let's just take a little bit of a break from this and come back. And we'll come back and it'll be a completely different conversation. But as an anxious attached person, or when that's at least my default, that is so hard in the moment. It's like, I want to get to resolution immediately. I want to get back to like, I know everything's okay. And taking a few minutes and just kind of letting the nervous system, I think what happens for him is because he's probably more secure in those moments, his nervous system is getting back to regulated. Mine's like, but is it okay? And I'm like looking for all the sick, and it does actually help. If I give myself enough time, I will get more regulated, but it's so hard to initiate that time to especially if you know that giving yourself time would help, but you're anxiously attached and like time feels like you just are so impatient to get to answers. Sometimes it can help to ask your people, can you call for a break? Because I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to be able to do it when I'm too dysregulated.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I want to add on to that, Kristen, which feels really important, is one thing the book really talks about is that our needs are valid. So you as an anxiously attached person, actually all three of us, we do feel better when we get that security and reassurance from our partner, and we don't actually need to feel bad about that. We're sort of hardwired to behave that way. So it makes sense that you would want to navigate that experience more quickly and get back to resolution, because that actually does make your body feel safer. And I think the point I'm trying to make is there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we're allowed to have needs. And I think to some extent we have shifted, not everybody, but like society has sort of shifted into this mindset of you have to do everything on your own, right? Like, and that's not really true. We should share our needs with our people. So even when we need to take a break, and yes, asking the other person to sort of call that break, because my nervous system is dysregulated right now. So I'm not going to be able to have access to that conscious thought right now. But I think the other really nice thing for anxiously attached people is there's nothing wrong for asking for reassurance in the midst of conflict. So it's nice for our partner or our friend or whatever to say to us, I still love you. I care about this relationship, and taking a break doesn't mean it's over. We're just going to regulate ourselves, right? I understand that takes a pretty high level of awareness to be able to have that conversation. But once we know these things about ourselves, there is nothing wrong with saying that that's a need I have. Can you please share with me what's going on for you right now? Because I'm feeling like, and the story I'm telling myself is that the relationship is over because we're in conflict. And just, again, this works easier with a secure person, and a more avoidant person is not going to respond well to this, at least not initially, until they do some work on themselves, because they're going to feel like you're sort of taking over and they're going to start pulling back. But a more secure person can certainly offer to you that the relationship is still safe, even though you're in conflict.
Yep.
I think that before we move on to avoidant, I just want to say that I feel like it's pretty important, I think, if you're an anxiously attached person. I mean, I'm going to say it, Amanda, I don't think anxious people do well with avoidant people. Like,
they do not.
Yeah. If
I'm like
you
getting
wanna,
closer to my mic.
if you want to heal your anxious attachment, you cannot be in relationship with a super avoidant person. Like
Right.
you will heal so much if you are in relationship with a securely attached person. And it is pretty unhealthy. Like the dynamic between an anxious and an avoidant, I think it could work if they were both really, really committed to getting over those patterns, but it would be
Right.
really triggering and really difficult compared to like what your relationship would be if you were with a securely attached
I mean,
person.
just be constantly triggering each other. I mean,
Constantly and constantly having to work
Exhausting.
through it. And it would be exhausting. Whereas at least in all of our experience with romantic partners who were securely attached or more securely attached than us, I feel like so much of that became easier because they provided like a real steadiness and a consistency and like a decent amount of space to like have your feelings. And you need reassurance, I will give you reassurance. Like these are things that are really lovely
you can't
to
annoy
receive.
me. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
Which is something I still don't believe that Joseph
know.
says to
It's
me. He's
hard
like,
for
you
us-
haven't ever annoyed me. I'm like, that's not true. He's like,
know.
well, but you don't annoy me.
When people say, when people come back and say, no, but I really like you, it's like, what? And I mean, I think it's a really common experience when you have this attachment style is to just, even when you get that validation, you still might question it. And I think that's just something to work on. And again, if you want to be secure, it's that belief that being loved and valued, like you inherently have that within you. And so we want to believe that. And that's where self-love comes in and self-regulation comes in. But again, before we move on to the next style, if I could just offer one more thing that was coming up for me as you were talking, Rachel, and I'm just like, I hate to say it because I'm a hopeless romantic, but we really got to watch out here when we're hopeless romantics because we can get that addiction to the chaos of the anxious avoidant dynamic. It literally feels like a roller coaster. There are extreme highs and extreme lows, and you are triggering the hell out of each other the entire time. And the anxious person so badly desires that closeness and the feedback of the relationship being safe. And the avoidant person can do that sometimes. A lot of times in the beginning of the relationship, they're really good at that. And that's what sort of draws the anxious person in. And they're, the intensity is there, right? Like the thing that I think a lot of us were trained to look for in relationships is there is like this huge rush of feeling. And that of course happens in love. Like when you fall in love, your body goes through a whole process and it feels a certain way. But when you're in this dynamic, because it's not consistent, like you were saying, Rachel, you just get addicted. It's almost like an addiction, right? There's a dopamine hit that you're getting every time. I've
been addicted to it. I think Kristen has too. I think you have as well.
I certainly have.
Yeah.
It's not fun. But when you're in it, it's hard to fully recognize what's going on because you so badly want to feel regulated again that you will do anything it takes. You will self-sacrifice every part of yourself to have that person come back to you. And again, like this doesn't just have to be romantic stuff. This can be friendships too. Like it can really and work, like you both mentioned. So I think one thing that's really important to reflect on is that you might not feel this huge spark, like explosion sort of experience if you're an anxiously attached person coming into relationship with a secure person. Like a lot of times you might hear, I don't know, this relationship's kind of boring. Or, I mean, I've said that with my own husband. Sorry, Todd, but he knows. Like, I don't know. It's just like, it's too calm. It's too safe. And when we have those thoughts, it's really a reminder to come back to attachment and remember that that's actually what we're looking for. We want that consistency. We just want our attachment system to not be activated all the time. And we don't want the high highs and the low lows.
Yep. That's not romance.
I know.
Learning to not mistake that roller coaster and that intensity for chemistry and for romance is so mature and it's really hard to do.
It's really
but it's
hard.
Not it that like dysregulation is not the same thing as having butterflies. And I think we mistake those things, right? We think, oh, I'm feeling like all fluttery. I must be really into him. And it's like, no, actually, he's just activating my nervous system. And I feel like scared and dysregulated and anxious. And this is actually a potential red flag, not like romantic.
Right. It's so hard. You have to have such a nuanced relationship with your body.
Because you're allowed to feel attracted to someone, right? Like, I'm not saying that you should end up with someone who's boring AF and who does absolutely nothing for you and you don't feel attracted to, but to like learn to be attracted to stability and consistency and security, and for those things and the hallmarks of those things to become attractive to you, rather than to be attracted to inconsistency, to chaos, to mixed messages, is imperative if you want to heal anxious attachment.
And it really does feel so much better. Like
it does in your body. It's such a relief.
I mean, it's almost like at this point, I feel like I have such little tolerance, way less tolerance than I used to have for that roller coaster, because it did feel kind of exciting, like in a new relationship. And what does this mean? And now I have it's like after you eat healthy food for too long and then you eat junk food, it's disgusting. But if you've only eaten junk food, it's like your body kind of acclimates.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's like, why would we want to have to overanalyze everything when there are people who can just be really direct, right? It just feels better, like you're saying, Kristen. But we do need to heal the addiction. And that's just another thing going on in our brains with dopamine. And so just being aware of that can help. I actually wrote down something from the book that I want to say when they talk about this. Well, actually, they really quickly, they say that the anxious avoidant attraction trap, what it's doing is it's confirming our core beliefs and our core wounds. And then it's reinforcing those patterns. So that's where that like addictive roller coaster thing comes in. But what they said in the book is, don't let emotional unavailability turn you on. True love equals peace of mind.
Mic drop.
Amen.
Do not let emotional unavailability turn you on. Oh my God. Every Netflix show featuring dating would be off the air.
Yep.
If people, like so much of the drama that our friends text us about in their dating lives, poof, gone. Because what we're all turned on by is emotional unavailability.
And we'll all just be walking around insecure, like, this is so boring. But actually it's so
life
great.
is great when it's boring. That should be that should be the subtitle of Attached.
I know, it really should be. And it's like, well, is it boring, or is it just creating this baseline of stability that lets you actually be the most authentic version of yourself because you feel safe?
Yeah, I agree.
So
it's just we have to overcome, I think, the initial fear that that's boring, or the initial sort of like distaste for eating lettuce when all you've eaten is junk food. Like, you have to let yourself acclimate to things to the point where now it will taste good, but it takes a while for things that are healthy to taste good after you've been accustomed to eating junk. But eventually it will. And then when you try to eat junk again, it will taste gross. Okay, Amanda. This could end up being a 2-hour episode if we're not careful. So,
okay, well, anytime you have me around on this podcast, it's going to be hard to reel it in.
It's okay. I love it. But okay, let's talk about avoidant.
Yes. Okay. So I'm glad we spent so much time on anxious, though, because we really understand that one. I also understand avoidant because I've got that touch of it in my attachment style. And so this is the opposite, right? So actually, when I feel like more intimacy is being built, more closeness is happening, that's triggering my attachment style and my nervous system. I'm going into more of a freeze state. So my body is deciding that I need to pull away to stay safe, and I need to sort of like hide and suppress. And so that's that sort of like dynamic where then they start to pull away. So to go back to our example of the disagreement, they might start to use some distancing strategies. Those could be emotional or physical. So all of a sudden they're like not as open. They're not talking as much. They're all of a sudden really busy when just a couple of days ago, they were completely available. And by the way, obviously being busy is normal, and that's a real thing that happens. But this is a really unique experience where someone sort of like 180 switches on you.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really make sense. And I would also say these are the moments to really connect to your body and say, like, what is this feeling like for me? Is this feeling true? Or is this feeling like something else? Right. But there could also be physical distancing, like they just pull back on on physical closeness, like that they might have been comfortable with previously. And so in that argument, like say you were holding hands, right? And then the argument starts escalating, they pull their hand away because they can no longer be in close contact. It's feeling too emotionally close to whatever that trigger is within them. They also have this more rigid view of what independence means. And so a disagreement can become really challenging because they're not necessarily interpreting emotions the same way as an anxious person is. In fact, they might even have a hard time like fully understanding their own emotional experience because a lot of that is suppressed. So it's going to be harder to have this like open conversation. So the conflict might not be as easy to navigate because they're not able to meet the other person emotionally where they are. And so instead, again, they're sort of like pulling back. And they can become really defensive because they feel like they're maybe being taken advantage of, maybe being so encroached on that their freedom is, at risk here. And so it can just be really challenging, I think, in that example for them. I mean, because honestly, people who have avoidant attachment, they're having an experience too, right? And it also doesn't feel good for them. And they might not even know why they're pulling away or why they're thinking that there's this like idealistic way that, life could be. And yet they're like, I can't quite find that with any of my partners. And it's because they're just, it's harder for them to have that emotional intimacy.
Yeah.
So what's going on in their body in that disagreement with their kind of nervous system, their hormonal system, that's creating that pullback effect?
Yeah. So I think that they tend to go more, they might end up in like fight or flight and have that defensiveness too, but it's more of that shutdown state where their body is just pulling them back. One thing that's really interesting actually about the nervous system and polyvagal theory is it's sort of like looking at the nervous system through this evolutionary lens. So when you find yourself in a free state, you've sort of gone back in time, right? And so it's like more of that hiding mentality that comes up in the body. And so it's not going to feel really regulated in the body, but there might be a little bit more disconnection or dissociation from the experience happening in their body. And that's why it's making it harder to access those emotions because they just don't feel safe.
Amanda did not have the pleasure of, I'm just going to throw myself under the bus this episode. That's fine. Amanda didn't have the pleasure of being in my friendship circle at the time that I was going through that very intense, definite and anxious avoidant a roller coaster with this guy that I dated a few years ago. I called him Will when I referred to him on Forever Alone. He was classic avoidant. And he was in that at the beginning, he was super consistent. He came across as secure at the very beginning, like in like the first week or two of texting and talking. But to be honest, the red flags were there from the beginning. I just chose to not pay attention to them. But the 180, Amanda, was so noticeable. So we'd been on like one date and then and he'd been super consistent and super communicative. And then after that date, literally didn't hear from him like for 48 hours. And honestly, if I hadn't then in my anxious state decided to text him, which I would never in a million years, you could catch me dead before I would do that now. But this was 3 years ago. I was a different person and I was being driven by my anxious attachment. I reached out to him and he of course came back because I think as an avoidant, probably to some degree, wanted or enjoyed being chased. And like once he'd had his space, right, it was okay to then come back. And then thus created this like cycle of him showing up and then disappearing. But the first time I saw it in a major way was when I was having a conversation with him and he got triggered by something very minor that I said and literally disappeared and did not talk to me for 2 days until I reached back out, of course. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, like you're right. He did not have the emotional fluency, like to be able to describe how he was feeling. He did not have the ability to hold space for my feelings. Like, and it was a really terrible, chaotic, like, but also very addictive cycle of like leaving and coming back and leaving and coming back. And now I'm just like thinking, oh my God, this would never happen again. Like, like,
because now, right? So you can look out for it.
And also Joseph would never like disappear for 2 days just because I said one little thing. Like he wouldn't get triggered by that. Or if he did, he would just be like, hey, that frustrated me. Can we talk about it? Like, because he has enough emotional fluency to be able to speak about how he was feeling. So I do have empathy for avoidant attached people because I do feel like they're very isolated in their experience. Like they're on their own having this experience that I don't know that they can always articulate. And they have to withdraw because they feel so overwhelmed, I think, by their own feelings potentially, and also other people's feelings. And they don't have the ability to maybe like articulate or externally process it. And so they end up just having to like withdraw and shut down in order to cope. And that's really lonely.
And
because,
they want
like, everybody wants love, right?
It's so want connection as much as anybody else, even if they sometimes almost act in ways that self-sabotage that connection. I mean, I guess all of the dysregulated styles do, but they can come across as not wanting it as much as other people because they'll just disappear for 2 days or just walk out in the middle of an argument or completely shut down. But they want it too. So this one's really interesting to me because I don't experience this. So I'm like extra curious about it. Rachel, you said something that is fascinating to me. Is it true that avoidant people who tend more toward that avoidant style, do they kind of want to be chased or do they find that smothering or maybe both?
So it depends on where their nervous system is in regulation. And actually, as we've been talking, I'm like, you know what? I have to say, to go back to your earlier question, Kristen, they might also be in their fight or flight, right? Because that's the running away. So or they might explode too. They might get really defensive and angry. So I think they have a really interesting reaction going on in their nervous systems. But do they like to be chased? Do they not like to be chased? I mean, I think because humans like to know that people want them, there's probably some level to all of us, right? Where it's like, yeah, of course we like the attention, but what they don't like is what comes after the attention. They do not feel as comfortable with the commitment piece. And so that's where they get dysregulated. And so once they start to calm down again in their nervous systems, that's when they might come back. There is this very classic sort of pattern where they disappear for a while and then they're back, or like you were saying, Rachel, the more anxious person or even the secure person reaches out and that brings them back. And so it does become this sort of very back and forth thing. So I think it probably just depends on the person and what's going on in their nervous system. If they feel, being chased is certainly a type of energy that to some extent might feel really good. And then there might be some like threshold in which now I feel like I'm being completely taken over and suffocated. And so now I'm really gone. And this is the dance between anxious and avoidant, right? That's the roller coaster effect. We're back, we're not back over and over and over.
It reminds me. Oh, sorry, Amanda.
No, that's okay. You can go. I was going to talk about a study that's in the book about avoidant, but you can go first.
Well, I was just going to say that this whole dance reminds me so much of, Amanda, I know that you've seen all the Harry Potter movies, but I don't know that you've read all of them yet.
Oh no, this is always sad for me to admit.
I know. It's okay. It's all right. You're going to get there.
I will.
But in the fifth book, at the very end, when Harry has lost Sirius, there's this scene that always stuck out to me about how when Harry was around people after this loss, he wanted to be alone. And then as soon as he was alone, he wanted to be around people again. And he could like never find comfort. Cause I mean, he was just adrift in his grief. And I feel like there's something about that that feels, not that Harry had an avoidant attachment style, but like that example to me feels like how what I might imagine an avoidantly attached person would feel is that like when I'm having, when I'm with somebody, sometimes I feel like the need to like withdraw and be by myself. And then once I've like withdrawn, I then feel lonely or I feel isolated. And because I'm human, I crave connection again. And so then that might lead me to eventually chase somebody or pop back into or let myself be chased,
Right.
And then that cycle is just really, really difficult to get out of.
Yep. That all sounds true. I love a Harry Potter moment, even if I haven't finished all the books, but there's this other really interesting thing that happens that I don't know if this happened to Harry, but it does happen to avoidant people, which is like once they're separated and they have time to feel more regulated, then they start to see all the positives that when they were in the experience felt like they couldn't see them as much, right? Because they're focused on the moments that are making them feel like they're having their autonomy taken away. And so that's part of this too. But yeah, that the loneliness is so important here because it can be really lonely. And the really interesting thing is an avoidant person might not always be able to identify that experience is actually happening to them because they're so convinced that being independent is the most important thing, that they might not actually recognize until they're out of an experience how lonely they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
And the study that I was going to mention, again, in the book, if you read it, you'll be able to get all the details on, who did it and where they did it. But they did this study that they had avoidant people be distracted by something. And in their distraction, they actually started acting more like the other attachment styles. Anxious, I think, was the one that they really turned into. And what that showed, what the study was proving was all these feelings are actually there, but they're just suppressed so much so until something happens that pulls their attention away from the strategies that allow them to like deactivate. And then all the emotions are actually right there under the surface. And I thought that was really interesting because, again, we've said it so many times, we're all human and we all have the need to be in connection with other people.
Yeah. But an avoidant, I think, in a way that I think is unique, at least in my experience, Amanda, you can tell me what you think about this, will often swear up and down that they're not having those feelings. And that,
1000%.
And they will all often be a little bit righteous about the fact that they don't have those feelings.
It's better that way.
And it's better that way. And they will defend their like not having feelings and whereas an anxious person, at least what I will say about us is we're honest. We'll be like, not only do I have those feelings, I have those feelings to the nth degree. And I need to talk about them.
You can't deny them.
Right.
They're so ever present.
You. Yeah, that's really, really true. Yeah. I mean, again, because I recognize this in myself and I, have experienced it too, like outside of myself, it is a really tricky one, especially because there's something in the book about another study that they reference where avoidants misinterpret emotional reactions as indifference when really the person that they're interacting with is having an experience. And so I think, again, that proves like there's a strange disconnect with, and it's not really strange, right? It makes sense when you understand how this is going on. But when you're observing this, it might feel strange. Like, why is there this disconnect? But it's their nervous system and then the attachment just really taking over the entire experience.
Okay. Should we talk about like disorganized first, or should we talk about like, again, at the risk of this becoming like the longest episode we've ever done, which I'm okay with. Should we talk about like, how do we heal avoidant attachment, or should we just talk about healing at the end?
I think so. I don't think we need to talk too much about disorganized because as long as you understand anxious and avoidant and you get that in a disorganized person, both of those are present. I think you can probably guess that that's a really challenging experience. It's a very small portion of the population that tends to fall into this place. And it's really like so badly seeking connection and then feeling overwhelmed by that connection and needing to pull away. And so, yeah, I think if all the things we've talked about just sort of filter into that experience, it can be one of the harder ones to heal from. So just keep that in mind if you feel like you resonate with that it might be a little bit harder, but it's totally possible. And one thing that you're going to really want to look out for is the certain people and experiences that trigger one reaction out of you versus the other, because it's likely that you're going to be navigating life and you're going to be coming in contact with different people that are going to bring out a different side in you. And that can be a bit overwhelming, right? If you're going along feeling pretty okay, then all of a sudden 2 separate people or 3 or 4 people are triggering different experiences out of you.
Yeah. As I've witnessed in you, Amanda, with your trying to work through disorganized attachment, you're like 2 people with different, in different facets of your life. You're like 2 different people. Yeah. And you're over here like having one experience with your partner, and you're like one person and with one set of baggage with him. And then you're over here with somebody else having like a totally different trigger and set of experiences. And then you have to work through that. And that's really difficult because at least with me, it's like, I'm just carrying the same baggage everywhere. So it's like, my anxious attachment is the same, right? Like as it is with anybody else. And thankfully, I'm not really feeling it with anybody else outside of, a romantic relationship for the most part anymore. But yeah, I do really feel for the disorganized people because that's just a lot of work to have to feel both of these things.
Yeah, it is. Thanks for saying that. And truly, I mean, anyone who's listening who has that going on, I really just want to keep saying that it's possible to feel better. It might take a little bit of extra love and care towards yourself and recognizing that you have these multiple experiences happening. I try to really honor the experiences that I have and also remind myself that there's opportunity in these moments, right? Like if I want to heal, then I'd have to also be presented with the opportunities to notice this coming up in myself. And if I'm only around secure people 24/7, I'll never really be able to as deeply heal it as I can when I have to interact with people who dysregulate me or throw me off track a little bit. But that having that secure base is extremely important because without that, it's challenging to heal from any of this.
Mm-hmm. So speaking of healing, I assume there's probably some healing strategies that work regardless of your style that are just generally valuable, helpful practices to kind of incorporate into however you're wired. And then I imagine that there are some that really work better if you're anxious attached versus if you're avoidant attached or disorganized, right? So I wonder where you want to start. Would it be helpful to jump into just overall everybody could use these strategies, or since we've gone through each of the styles, is there anything that you really want to start with that might be specific to one of them?
So let's just start more general, I guess, and then see where that takes us. Because I do think a lot of the strategies help everybody, even people who are secure, right? Because they might have moments where they get a little bit triggered, and just to remember to come back to themselves and find that calm can be helpful. So I guess the first place I want to start is with co-regulation, because we are not designed to be completely alone, even though something we didn't even really get into. But if you read the book, you'll read more about evolution here and how it's actually great that we have different attachment styles, because that's allowed the human species to survive. If we all had the same one, if some catastrophic thing happened, we might not have survived. And so we had to have different ways to navigate life. And because we are designed to be in connection with one another. I mean, think of the way we come into this existence. We're actually never alone. We're with our mothers. They're co-regulating with us from the moment we exist. And so we do need to carry that through into being adults, is recognizing that our nervous systems are created to work together. and that there is this give and take. We can't expect that we'll all be regulated at the same time, even though we sort of joked about that earlier with just the world being boring, but that there is this sort of flow to relationships in which like my nervous system is regulated and maybe yours isn't right now. And that's okay. And that's helping us to get into more coherence. And maybe we do find balance for a time before someone gets triggered again. So I could sort of go on and on about that, but I just think that's really important to remember is one of the most healing things that we can do in this area is identify the people that provide safety to us and really lean into them. Because from that safe base, whether that's your partner or your parent or your really close friend or your boss, it doesn't matter. You actually can explore more about yourself and the world. And we can even think about this with children, right? Like when you feel secure as a child with your parent, you're more likely to be a little bit riskier. And that's a good thing. We want to see that. We want to see kids learning in that way. And it's the same for adults. So let's just start there and just say that's huge, is finding safe people that you can start to explore these parts of yourselves with. And that could be a therapist. Again, we said that earlier, like it might be a coach, like it's just the person that you know will be able to stay regulated with you. And then I would say the other really important thing is just practicing communication. It's very challenging for so many of us because we weren't modeled healthy communication. We didn't see it around us. Yeah, maybe if we got lucky, we did. But I think a lot of people weren't necessarily taught, how do I communicate in a way that I can really hear what the other person is saying, even if that bothers me in some way, I can find enough calm to be able to reply and have this back and forth dynamic or take a break, right? Like we talked about earlier. And so that's huge. And again, that goes hand in hand with the co-regulation. If you can find safe people to practice communicating with, even if you get triggered, that's going to be a game changer. Because then when you're interacting with your partner, you can remember those skills. And then I would also say another thing that's not always modeled to us in childhood is emotional intelligence and fluency in our experience, right? And so that's a lot of the work of just allowing yourself to notice your emotions. You don't have to create some huge storyline about what they mean, but even just bringing awareness to this emotion's coming up in me right now can be really helpful to then get really brave in some instances and share those emotions with your partner. So, and again, remember, these are things that a more secure person can sort of naturally do. So we just want to practice being like that and being really open. I mean, I have to say it, having an open heart, like really living from the heart space, not getting so caught up in our minds. And okay, a couple more things, and then I'll see what you guys think. I think we kind of mentioned it earlier, but remembering not to play games. So if we have the desire to move into a protest behavior, like we talked about some of them, he didn't get back to me or she didn't get back to me in 24 hours. So now I'm going to wait 24 hours. If we catch ourselves moving into that space, getting curious about why it's there, we don't have to judge it. We can just say, oh my goodness, I'm doing this thing. What does this mean? And how can I maybe change that reaction into something that's actually going to build more connection and not disconnect from this person? We also want to stay in the present moment. A lot of our experience is based on the past, right? Or we're thinking about the future. And as we're working towards security, being more in this moment and taking in the information that's happening now as much as possible so that we don't sort of like overgeneralize or make all these assumptions will allow us to practice the other things we talked about, essentially. And I could keep going, but let me stop there and see how you guys are feeling.
Well, okay, I have a couple things I want to say to that. One is that I feel like to add to your list of things that we can work on is I feel like just working on learning how to regulate our own nervous systems, like is so imperative, because the more we can work on opening our window of tolerance, like widening that window, then the less we get triggered. And so then the less our attachment style is sort of controlling how we behave and how we think. And so what's great about that is that you can work on regulating your nervous system sort of like outside your romantic relationship, right? Like you can just meditate as a person. You can work on like deep breathing exercises and things like that, so that when potentially you get triggered by your romantic partner, then maybe it's actually harder to get you to the point where you're that triggered because you've been working on soothing your nervous system, or at least now you have tools so that when you're feeling yourself getting triggered, you can actually like pause and like try to return more to a state of calm in the moment. So that I think is imperative.
Yes.
And then the other thing I want to just say is like, at least in terms of maybe not so much a healing thing, but I feel like it's important to say is that I do encourage people to read this book because you, Amanda, like when I was telling you like everything I was experiencing, I really thought a lot of my behavior was avoidant, and it wasn't. It was completely anxious. And so I think that sometimes we have a perception that we might be one way, and that actually it can present in ways that we're not aware of. Like, I think a lot of the time, I think there are a lot of anxious people out there who might be like, Kristen, this is totally you. You, I think, might present as avoidant to some people because you don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll like shut down and you won't like bring up difficult conversations, but it's not actually because you're avoidant. It's because you're anxious and you don't want to threaten the relationship by speaking up.
Exactly.
Right? You're not actually shutting down. You're having all these feelings. You're just choosing not to express them. Right? Like, yeah, the why behind it is really important. And so I feel like if you're at all confused by anything we've shared today in terms of like, which one of these am I? That's why the book exists, is because there's like a really deep dive you can do on all of the ins and outs of each of these. And Amanda really like blew my mind because I thought I was maybe disorganized, and I'm really just completely anxious because all of the stuff I was doing I thought was avoidant was actually just anxious.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Actually, I'm so glad you said that, Rachel, because withdrawing is an anxious protest behavior. So it can be confusing.
Yeah.
Right? It can be. And so actually, yes, to plug the book, there's a quiz in the book and you can just take that quiz. And it will tell you what's going on, at least in this moment for you.
Okay. So I think we have to start wrapping this up because
no,
never. But we're not really done because as you guys can probably tell, just based on how long this episode was and how we really barely scratched the surface, and the fact that Kristen and I have kind of repeatedly returned to this subject like over the last year, I have just, again, because we cannot unsee this now. I see it in every client pretty much I work with now. I see their attachment style. I see it, like I see how it's deeply impacting their romantic relationships. I see how it's impacting their relationship to their work, to their boss, even just to the like concept of work, period. I know that we think of attachment as something you do with another person, but I really think that our attachment style is something we can kind of project onto like our very notion of like productivity, even, or, like achievement
or a job. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and so, right. So I feel like unless you understand this and are working on it actively within yourself, you are doing yourself such a disservice, and you're not really able to like, I think, heal to the degree we need to heal. And then like get to the next level that we're really looking to get to. Like if you don't heal your anxious attachment and you continue to try to like, get to a different level in your career, a lot of these patterns are going to keep preventing you from making progress because you're going to keep having these like really triggering experiences with coworkers or bosses. And you're going to keep thinking, wow, why do I keep ending up in like the same situation over and over again? I have such bad luck. Well, no, maybe you actually just have an anxiously attached style and you keep taking it with you wherever you go. And so this is like a bedrock foundational healing that we all need to be doing on ourselves, like period, because all of us have an attachment style. And working towards secure will only help us like make progress in every area of our life. And so
true.
Gotta do it. Like it's really
so
like
true.
It's obligatory that we focus on this. And as you can tell, it's complicated and you might need help focusing on it. And so, Amanda, because you are obsessed with this.
Obsessed.
and so passionate about it, you have decided to create a group experience, a group coaching experience where you are going to be next month, starting in April, taking people through an 8-week journey to help them learn more about and heal their attachment style. And so for those of you who are like, wow, I really resonated with this. I want to learn more about this. I want to heal it. Please, like, Amanda, we're going to let you talk about it. And also we're going to be, Amanda's going to be giving everyone who is from our audience a really, really generous discount code for this program the first time she's running it. So stay tuned for that.
Yes. I'm really thrilled that we got to talk about this because everything you just said is so true, Rachel. If we want to be the best versions of ourselves, if we want to be authentic, then we have to understand these things. And I love what you said about just regulating the nervous system, because it really does start there. All those different ways we get back in connection with our bodies. So many of us have been living from our minds. So that's some of the work that we'll do in this group experience. It's going to cover all the things. It's going to definitely talk about the nervous system, because we cannot do this work like we talked about today without touching on that. We're going to use each week to break down each attachment style even deeper than we did today, and then end with secure attachment. But what I love about this experience is that because it's in a group format, we'll hopefully have a range of attachment styles there. And I think that's really going to be beneficial, because it's not just going to be information. That'll be a part of it too, but it'll be like, let's bring forward some real life scenarios that you're either living through right now or recently did. And there'll be some coaching built into it, but let's talk about those. Let's learn from each other. And I think there's something really special about that, because if we want to get better, then it can be helpful to hear from, an anxious person, to hear from an avoidant person, and get some more perspective in that way. And then because I'm me and I love energy, there's going to be some energy healing built into it. We'll start every session with some grounding and breath work, and just, again, reconnecting to the body, because we know that we can try to positively think our way out of all sorts of things. But if we're still feeling dysregulated in our bodies, then that connection isn't quite there yet. And so that'll be really built into this as well. And lots of integrations that you can move forward feeling like you didn't just learn something about yourself, but that you really can take that forward into your life and continue, healing even after the experience is over.
I can attest that you are the type of coach who can do what I think is sometimes really difficult for people in like the healing profession to do. And by healing, I mean coaching, therapy, whatever, to take people from intellectual understanding to really feeling different in their body,
True
like
embodiment.
That,
yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Amanda is good at that. I think Kristen and I think you and I have become good at that over time too. But I think a lot of people have been in years of therapy, for example. At least I've seen a lot of clients come to us after they're like, wow, I know everything about my problems. I know everything about my triggers, but I still feel triggered. And I feel like some of the missing pieces are the things that Amanda is talking about. Like, well, then you probably haven't worked on your nervous system regulation. And so incorporating those like more physical embodiment practices to then, with intellectual understanding is, I think, the difference that a lot of us are missing. And so I'm really glad and like not at all surprised that Amanda's going to put a huge emphasis on that, because that's what you need in order to like properly move on from something and heal.
Rachel, that makes me feel so emotional. I was honestly getting teary-eyed, because I feel like that is my passion. Mm-hmm. Is we have to like deeply feel on so many levels, and that can be really scary. And I love doing that work with people. As someone who was shut down for a very long time, I just love doing that work. So thank you for saying all of that. It feels really nice.
Of course. Okay. So logistically, people can like sign up for this now. We'll have a link in the show notes. Is there an easy URL that you can also spell out?
Yeah. So you guys can go to heartsparksoul.com/attached.
Okay.
That'll be the special landing page for this offer. I'll also put it on my homepage in case you got lost. So don't worry about that. It'll be in multiple places, but that would be where you would go. And I'm actually not even going to ask you to use a special code for the Clarity on Fire audience. I'll just have it. I'll have the discount, which is 20% off the program. I'll just have it baked into the experience. So you can just go there and
love it.
Navigate your way through.
heartsparksoul.com/attached. That will also be in the show notes. 20% off is huge. That's a lot. And it's really generous. And I hope some of you will take advantage of that and join Amanda. And it starts on April 22nd, right?
And so yes, it's going to start that week. I actually have 2 different sessions built in. So there's going to be a daytime and an evening. And we'll just
take your pick.
Take your pick. I mean, if most people want one over the other, we'll just run with that. But when you sign up, you can let me know what sounds like the right fit for you and we'll go from there.
Okay. So they will be live and they will be recorded, I'm assuming too, if someone can't make it live that week. Yeah.
It will be.
And then there will be like a group kind of connection chat piece as well each week.
Yes.
For
there
8
will
weeks.
There will be. And because I think that's really important, again, to continue the conversation. I'm also going to create some special meditations that will be, I'll make one for each of the attachment styles. And so that'll be something that people can take away as well. And, just after the fact, be able to work on it. And the ones that are for the more insecure styles will be leading us towards more security in our meditation.
Love it.
Okay, so that's really exciting. And I really hope that you get a good turnout for this group because are you capping the number of people who can join or no?
I'm not. I don't think so. I've thought about that, but honestly, I want as many people who feel called to this to be able to participate. So we can, if there's more than feels appropriate for us, one group, then we'll break it up. So I'm going to be pretty flexible. I trust and believe that the right people will show up.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll make it work for them.
Is there, if it starts on April 22nd, is there going to be like a cutoff for signing up?
I'll probably close the registrations the Friday before that week of April 22nd so that everyone can be prepared and know what they need to, where they need to be and what they need to bring the next week.
Well, obviously, I hope that they just sign up now if they feel called to do this. But the last thing I want to say is that if you guys haven't listened to Amanda's normal person interview from last year on this podcast, please go back and listen to it for 2 reasons. One, because it's on a really amazing episode. It's called From Totally Shut Down to Feeling Your Feelings Again with Amanda Johnson from June 2023, June 9th to be specific. But also, fun fact, even if you've listened to that episode before, you might want to go back and listen again, or at least listen to the end, because during that episode, Amanda gave a discount code. It was a discount code that time.
It was. Yep.
For her signature Heart Spark session, which she and I talk about what that is, and we get into details about how magical that experience is. So if you're not maybe feeling called to the attached group, or maybe you are, maybe you just want to work with Amanda on all fronts, great. She's going to actually reactivate that code that's at the end of that episode for the month of April. So if you want to do a Heart Spark session, which is amazing, it is one of my favorite types of sessions I've ever done. Kristen, I think you can agree with me on that.
100% agree.
Yeah. Then even if you've done one before, that's totally fine. If you're new, I really think you should do it. That discount code will also be active for the month of April. But you have to go back and do a little scavenger hunt to find what the code is. Okay?
We love a scavenger hunt.
Yeah.
We love them.
Okay. All right,
Thank
Amanda,
you.
this was so great. And honestly, I feel like we barely talked about attached, even though we did talk about it for an hour and a half or maybe an hour and 40 minutes.
Too much.
Yeah.
There's so much, especially because we all have our personal connections, right? So you start to hear this stuff and you immediately start thinking about, that I had that thing happen. But if I could just make one final plug for the book, there are so many studies in there and so many examples. And you really should read it if you at all feel inspired by this episode.
It sounds like, if you need validation and reassurance or like understanding, I think the book gives you that in terms of your attachment style. And also just like teaches you a shit ton about.
Yeah.
And like Amanda, again, has been like my personal tutor on this book. Actually, the last thing I want to say, Amanda, is that in typical you and me kind of fashion, you got obsessed with this book and finished it the day before I matched with Joseph on Bumble.
I am so glad you brought this up. I've been thinking about it.
Literally as if the universe said, do some homework, you're going to have a student. And as soon as you were done with your homework, the student appeared.
It's so true. And not only did you also appeared in my physical home because you came to visit me.
Literally that same week.
It's all we talked about. We talked about other stuff, but we talked a lot about attached.
I like to think that I helped fuel your initial passion for it because of how much we ended up talking about it. And yes, you finished that book. I matched with him. And then like 4 days later, I was in your house and I was texting him and you were helping me you were co-regulating with me as I was texting him that initial week. Cause I was in your house and you were teaching me about attachment theory. And I'm just like, wow, sometimes the universe like really, really throws you a bone, you know?
You can't make up that timing. That's too
You
crazy.
cannot. And we have to thank Todd for this too, because he read that book first. I have no idea why. He just picked it up and then like it was in my Audible and the rest is history. So thanks, Todd. Thanks universe.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Please check out Amanda's group coaching experience around attached. heartsparksoul.com/attached. And Amanda, I'm positive you'll be back the next time we have something to. Maybe we need to do a whole other episode at some point about the nervous system, because I feel like that's, I don't know. I just think it's necessary after this conversation.
Yeah. And there's a really fantastic tool called nervous system mapping, which anybody can do. You'll learn so much about yourself. So,
okay. All right.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you both so much.
Episode.
All right.
Thank you, Amanda. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. That was a marathon. And like, you thought you were done. And psych, I have a couple more points to make because
It's us.
It's us. But because after the episode, Amanda and I were debriefing it over voice note back and forth. And she was like, oh, there's 2 things I forgot to say. Will you tell people this? And I was like, yes, hit me. So here's what she wanted to say, which I think is really important. And I'm glad that she brought these 2 things up. She wanted to mention that in the dance between anxious and avoidant attached people, the anxious person will very often, and Kristen, I think you can attest to this for sure. I think I've done this, but not quite to the same degree. The anxious person will often change themselves to please the avoidant person.
Oh, especially if you're also a people pleaser.
Which you're probably
anxious attached plus people pleaser.
It's the same thing. Like, I feel like there aren't as many avoidant people pleasers, though there might be. They might just be the type of people pleasers who like avoid conflict and shut things down and withdraw and just never bring up conflict. Whereas an anxiously attached person is probably more a classic people pleaser who's like making overt changes to themselves and not speaking, whatever, so that they can keep the peace and have a connection with someone, right?
Welcome to most of my 20s.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because on some level, as an anxiously attached person, that this avoidant person isn't safe and that if you were your true full self, they would leave. And so that doesn't last though, because eventually your true self and your true needs are going to start to come out. And you're going to have to be, whether you intend to or not, there is going to be truth and honesty that will start to come out. And eventually the avoidant person is going to pick up on that. And they're going to be like, what the fuck? This isn't who I signed up for. And now their nervous system is activated.
Sure. Because you were pretending to be somebody else to please them, but then you're actually yourself. And even if, whether or not they liked you who you turned out to be, you gave them a 180. You kind of changed the game on them. Yeah. Anybody would get triggered by that.
Probably, yeah. So it's a plug for being courageous. And like, it's so important to be your true self from the very beginning.
It actually just saves an anxiously attached person so much trouble.
Anguish. Share your needs up front. Share your needs up front. It should be a song. Like...
Seriously, think about how long you can spend people pleasing somebody, trying to morph yourself into being
not bringing up
somebody.
things that actually are meaningful to you. You can waste months, years of your life.
And if they're not the right person, it's not going to work out anyways.
Just find out now.
Find out earlier, please.
This is something I actually like. It's like my anxious attachment didn't kick in until I actually liked someone. If I didn't know whether I liked them, it wasn't really kicking in yet. And so
there was nothing to lose.
At the beginning, I never had a problem being like, this is who I am. This is what I want. If you don't like it, get the fuck out. Like, it was when I was like, oh, they do like me. They do want the same things as me. We have similar interests. I think they're hot. Then I'm like, uh-oh. And then my anxious attachment would go crazy.
Well, now what if something is right? It seems good, but what if something rocks the boat? Yep.
But having the guts to just own, this is who I am. This is what's important to me. These are my values. It's so important so that you don't waste time with someone who doesn't want to meet those needs or can't meet those needs. And that leads me to my second point, which is that if we're talking about dating specifically, this is a depressing statistic, okay? But it's also just true, and we can't hide from the truth. The majority of people on the dating apps, this is a statistic from the book. I don't know the actual number. Amanda didn't mention it in the voice notes, but the majority of people on dating apps are avoidant.
Interesting.
Because they're more likely to bounce from relationship to relationship. So they're more likely to be single, and people in people who have a secure attachment style are more likely to be partnered.
Interesting.
Because they're more content with relationships.
Sure.
Also, I would say that anxious people are also more likely than an avoidant person to be in a relationship.
Probably.
Right? Because they like relationships. They want to be in relationships. So if they're with a secure person, then right. So like
and you're an anxiously attached person on the dating apps with a bunch of avoidant people.
Oh, that's where
triggers.
That's where a lot of the trauma of dating apps is coming from, is the dance between anxious and avoidant people on the apps. So she was like, the best strategy if you are on the apps is to, if you can, like date multiple people. Like don't get and like suss out their attachment style before you get like super involved with them or super interested in them. Like don't put all your eggs in like one person's basket, and like try to wait for more information. Take it slow. Get to know someone, because again, the avoidance at the beginning, they can be really good at like consistency and communication, and they can present as secure. And it's only until there's a little bit more intimacy that gets built that all of a sudden they'll do that 180 and they'll get freaked out and they'll run away and they'll shut down, which I've definitely experienced from guys I've met on the apps. At least two big ones that I'm thinking of.
There's no reason to take it personally, because if the majority of people on there are acting that way, it's not really about you.
No, it doesn't mean that you can't find love on the dating apps, because I know that is false. And I also met someone who is securely attached on a dating app.
Yeah. I met my husband on, I don't know if it was an app, but it was
Match.com. Like in 2018. So you were really cool for using that back then.
Woo, we were
too hot to trot.
There's no swiping. It was just writing long profiles.
I mean, a Hinge, I think, and Bumble probably did exist back then. But anyway.
So yeah, you can meet your people on apps, online. That's actually how most people are meeting these days, if we're just being honest. I don't know what the stat is on that, but I guarantee you it's the majority of people now. But it does mean there are different things to be aware of.
There's landmines out there.
And that's always been true in dating, but it just feels like it's extra heightened now that we've got all these apps where we have access to way more humans.
Yeah. Well, I just think that probably was true too of the single pool 30 years ago.
Think about bars or wherever people would go.
Yeah, like most of the guys hanging out in the bar are probably avoidant, because like if they wanted to be in a relationship, they might already be in a relationship.
Right. They'd probably be at a different place with their partner
right?
Single at the bar.
Right. So I don't think it's a dating app problem. I think it's just once you get to a certain age thing. I think in your 20s, that's not necessarily the case, right? Yeah, I think to be single is, I think the older you get, I'm guessing the older you get, if you're, as you're still single, it's probably more likely that you're avoidant.
Yeah.
Which isn't true for me, obviously.
Right. But you weren't having the same reasons for being single as somebody who's avoidant, who is just dating all the time and constantly pushing people away. That was not your story. But I
Right.
do think that is a common story. So it's just something to be aware of.
Yeah. So those are two important points that.
And if you are an avoidant type, then you might want to recognize that online dating or dating apps can be
really triggering for the other people involved.
And they can sometimes enable your avoidant behavior. And so if you don't want to keep that pattern going, you might have to catch yourself realizing, well, I could just ghost this person. Well, is that how I really want to keep it up?
That's kind of the sort of bigger point that Amanda was making in these 2 points, is that unfortunately, between an anxious and an avoidant person, the avoidant person tends to have all the power.
That makes sense.
And so if you are an avoidant person and you want to grow and evolve and become more secure, part of your responsibility is to not abuse that power.
Mm-hmm.
And to be upfront and communicate with people, even when your instinct is to withdraw and that kind of stuff. So,
which creates more of a power balance.
Yeah.
Which is what we're looking for.
Yeah. So anyway, okay. Wow, what an episode. I loved it. I hope you guys loved it too.
I'm sure this has your brain going a lot of different directions. We'd love to hear your comments on attachment theory, on what stood out to you, on any of your own examples that you want to share. We'd love to keep this conversation going. And if this just got you as excited as we are about this whole concept of attachment theory, please check out Amanda's course,
heartsparksoul.com/attached.
She's gonna take you through
8 weeks,
quite a journey of learning about this, healing from this, and becoming a much more securely attached person on the other side of it. So,
and I think we could all benefit from that, whether we're in relationships or single or whatever. It can help us with work. It can help us at home. It can help us everywhere. And also, again, if those of you who are interested in maybe working with Amanda in a classic Heart Spark session, go back to June of 2023, listen to her normal person interview, and then use that code at the end of the episode that she's going to reactivate to get, I don't even remember what the percentage is, but it's a good % off of a Heart Spark session for the month of April. So, okay. Thank you so much for listening to this.
Hanging in there all the way to the end here.
2-hour plus long episode. And we will be back next Friday with a brand new Dear Rachel.
See you then.